Hi everybody, my name is Karen Fabian and I'm the founder of Bare Bones Yoga, and I wanted to take a minute to talk about hip anatomy. And this comes from a question that was posed yesterday when I did an Instagram Live free workshop all about hip anatomy. And you can catch that on my Instagram profile, Bare Bones Yoga. Just go to the IGTV tab. So the question had to do with, is it safe to move students from poses where the hips are centered and then you turn them to the side? And this is something I've heard over and over again over the years. And I always like to start with the anatomy before we get into getting kind of on the path of agreeing or not agreeing with a particular narrative that's out there in the yoga industry that's grounded in anatomy. It's really important that we walk any statement like that back to be sure we understand the anatomical components that make it up. So let's first take a look at the hip in general. So when we look at the hip, we see that we've got the pelvic bone and we've got the femur, and the head of the femur fits into the acetabulum of the pelvis. Now, once you disconnect from the bones or kind of scroll out from the, or view out from the bones, of course you've got muscles and ligaments and tendons that are all surrounding this area here. The one structure I want to bring your attention to, and I talked about this on the Instagram Live yesterday, is the labrum. And the labrum is a connective tissue structure that increases the connectivity or joint congruency between the head of the femur and the acetabulum of the pelvis. It's essentially a ring of connective tissue that surrounds the joint, and it creates a better connection between these two bones. A joint is where two bones connect, and it's where movement occurs from. And it really is important that we've got good connections there. We don't want joint laxity where these two pieces are falling apart, and we don't want what many people experience, which is tightness in the joint, which limits range of motion. We also don't want, and some of this we can't avoid as we age, changes in the joint, what are otherwise known as degenerative changes from overuse. And this can happen if you're doing the same movement over and over and over again. So having said all that, we've got the head of the femur in the acetabulum of the pelvis, we've got the labrum creating better joint congruency, we've got various ligaments and tendons, and then we certainly have what falls into our purview as yoga teachers a lot, the musculature, the muscles that are around the joint and support it. So just like the rotator cuff supports the joint of the shoulder, we've got several different muscles around the hip joint. The other thing before we dive into the muscles that I want to speak to is the type of joint that it is. Same as the shoulder, it's a ball and socket. When we look at the muscles that surround it, there are many, many muscles. We'll just briefly say we've got the glute medius and minimus on the lateral aspect of the hip. We've got the psoas and the rectus femoris on the anterior hip. We've got the gluteus maximus and the external rotator group on the back. And we've got all the adductor group on the inner line of the thigh, the medial aspect of the thigh. Now, all of those muscles create the different movements of the hip. So we have things like flexion and extension, external and internal rotation, abduction and adduction. So now that we know all of that, it's easy to see how we have the ability as humans, because of the shape of the joint, to take a movement like this, where our hips are facing the front, and rotate this way. The reason it's easy to do that is because we have a ball and a socket. And so as we turn this way, we're leveraging the natural shape of the joint. Now, having said that, you can see in this position here, my feet are grounded to the floor. So as I turn to the side, sometimes I might have some unintended consequences because I'm locked down. And one of the things that we commonly notice in yoga teaching is that as people turn from here to here, this knee will travel along with them because their feet are locked down. So sometimes there are cues once they turn, let's say from warrior 1 to warrior 2, is to center the front knee forward. But in terms of this back hip, this question that came in had to do with, is there some potential compression that is created because we're turning from here to here? Now I want you to just hold that thought for a second, because I want to show you a different scenario, and this was actually the scenario that the person stated in the question, and that is moving from a posture like airplane to half moon. And so if you watch this back hip here, it's the same movement, moving from internal to external rotation that we have here, except what's the difference? Well, in this variation, my feet are not locked to the floor. This back foot is off the floor. And you can see I have very little movement in the front knee in a way where, as I'm doing it this way, you see the knee tends to kind of lump in or merge in or lean in to the midline. So let's take a look at going back to what we learned at the beginning of this video and applying it now to the question at hand. Because the hip joint is a ball and socket, we are able to easily, to a certain extent, do these movements. We now know there are some in a locked down position, unintended alignment issues that we'll want to correct. And we now know that in a position like this, if we're changing from internal to external rotation, the person will have an easier time of it because the one foot is free. It's more of a, what we call an open chain situation. Now, specifically, is there any compression placed on the joint because we're taking it from an internal rotation to an external rotation? And unfortunately, the answer to that for most of us as teachers is that we won't know what's happening in our students' bodies. We can't see in their bodies, obviously, to know if there's any degenerative changes there that would make this movement potentially injurious for them. Now, I want you to keep in mind that there's a lot you don't know about your students when you're teaching. And so from a risk perspective, taking somebody from internal to external rotation generally is pretty low risk. If they have something that has been going on in the hip for a while, is it possible that that one movement might tweak something and create more of a situation that is leading to an injury? Sure, it's possible. But there are lots of things that we're teaching that unfortunately could poke and prod something that's brewing in someone's body that we never would know about, that maybe the student knows about or maybe the student doesn't know about. And so to wrap all this up, I want you to keep in mind that understanding the nature of the joint, that it is a ball and socket, gives us the ability to easily move from internal to external rotation. We're just taking advantage of the anatomy that's there. It's important that we keep in mind positions where the feet are locked, more fixed, are going to create other unintended consequences that we need to watch for and correct. Positions where it's not a fixed pose, where it's open chain, won't have those show up as much. What I would say to wrap all of this up is that rather than getting caught up in these narratives out there about worry about this and worry about that and watch for this and this can cause compression and this can cause sacroiliac pain and low back issues, you'd be better served as a teacher to learn the fundamentals of anatomy, because then with that knowledge, you can apply it to any situation and have a better understanding, like this one, about what the risks really are. And one final thing, the most important way that you can decrease risk for your students has to do with your pose selection in your sequences and how you put your sequencing together. So that's another thing that it would be really great to spend your time on. Learn the fundamentals of anatomy and learn how to pull it all together in highly accessible sequences where the risk is really low, because what you're offering people isn't necessarily easy, but it's pieced together in a way and with individual poses where the accessibility is really high. the more we start to add on all these variations, the risk goes up, the requirements of the joints to have a lot of range of motion goes up, and that's where risk goes up and unintended consequences can occur, whether it's because someone has something going on in their body that they're aware of or not. Now, is that your fault as a teacher? Absolutely not. You're there to teach movement, to watch your students, and guide them through the practice. However, it's definitely your responsibility to make sure you understand anatomy and how to piece together the poses in a way where there's a lot of accessibility for most, if not all, of the students in your classes. So I hope that you found this helpful. I would encourage you to go to my website, which has been completely overhauled as of this month, August 2021, and there are very clear access points right on the homepage to several different downloads that will give you a lot of information that will shape not only sequence building, but your learning anatomy. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you on the next video. Don't forget to leave a comment and let me know what you thought. Namaste.